Okay, so now the final story, because we all thought, all this horrible stuff was happening in the 80s and 90s, and we all might wish for the good old days of LA, but we're all wrong, because it was, if not worse,
Really?
in the early days of Los Angeles.
How early?
Very early. LA, it has a brutal history. I had no idea about this. So to paint the picture, 1848.
Yeah, all the way back.
The California Gold Rush started. Also in 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed and ended the U.S.-Mexican War. And then in 1850, California became a united state. Also in 1850, LA became an official city. So all of this brought a huge influx of population to the city. Also around this time, all of the bandits and desperados that operated in the gold mines up north were being driven away south and took refuge in LA.
Oh.
Meanwhile, all the outlaws from Mexico were coming up north to head to the gold mines, and both of these groups met in the middle in LA, and they did not get along. What this meant was that during the 1850s, there were midnight raids, open day robberies, and just flat out murder of innocent people in the streets every day.
Wow.
A visitor to LA at this time said, "I never yet saw so many gallows birds as may be seen here in all my life before." And there was no order at all. One year, the mayor of LA resigned from his job to lead a mob that dragged a suspect from jail and lynched him. And then this ex-mayor now had a special election to get himself reelected, and he won.
Wow.
And this was the first American mayor of LA. So vigilante justice was the law of the land, and there was no police force to stop it. There was a sheriff, but there was no police force. So in 1853, prompted by the murderer of the city's second city marshal was himself murdered by a bounty hunter. So they figured, all right, we need something. We need to do something. So they said there was a volunteer force called the Los Angeles Rangers that were formed that eventually became the LAPD. So at the tail end of this era in LA history came one of the most legendary and notorious bandits of all time, and he was referred to as the Scourge of California.
Oh my God.
This man's name was Tiburcio Vasquez.
Yeah.
He was born Jose Jesus Lopez on August 11th, 1835 in Monterey as the youngest child to a very respectable family. His grandpa was one of the first mayors of San Jose. His great-grandpa came to California as part of the De Anza expedition in 1776. Vasquez himself, he was very well educated. He was bilingual. He wasn't very intimidating. He was like 5'5", but he was extremely charismatic and charming, and everyone loved him. He was the apple of every man, and especially every woman's eye. He wore fashionable clothes. He was a great dancer. He was an even better guitar player. When he was 17, he opened up a dance hall. A few years later, things were getting a little rowdy at a fandango one night, Scaramouche, and a white constable was killed. So then Vasquez panicked. I'm not sure if it was his cousin or his friend, this guy Anastasio Garcia, who used to be in Joaquin Murrieta's band, I think, who is like the number one bandit in California history is Joaquin Murrieta. Number 2 is Vasquez. So this guy he was friends with, or cousins with, I'm not sure, he was a vicious bandit. They both fled the scene after the murder of the constable, and they went into hiding, leaving their third friend to hang for the murder.
Oh my God.
So while he was in hiding, Vasquez began to learn the lifestyle of an outlaw, and he took to it. He never looked back, and it was at this time he changed his name to Tiburcio Vasquez. From then on, Vasquez tagged along with Garcia and his gang as they robbed stagecoaches and they rustled horses from ranches all the way from San Jose down to LA County. He even got mixed up in the Roach-Belcher feud up north, which I had never heard of, but it was like it was like this Hatfields and McCoy type thing going on, but in California, so it was better. So they were doing that until like 1857. Then he was in Newhall up by Santa Clarita. He got arrested for stealing horses, and he was sentenced to 5 years in San Quentin. However, June 25th, 1859, there was a huge prison riot at San Quentin. Vasquez escaped, and then he got arrested a year later in July 1860 for stealing horses again in Jackson. He was sent back.
He loves horses.
He just loved little ponies. Then in September, I could do a pony. Then in September 1860, he and some other prisoners captured a guard and tried to flee across the San Francisco Bay. I call it the Frisco Bay.
Yeah.
that they were caught again, and Vasquez was chained up and thrown into a dungeon in San Quentin until he got released legally in August 1863.
Okay, let him out of the dungeon.
Then in January 1867, he got caught up again trying to rob a store in Mendocino, and he went back to San Quentin. But he got out later that year. So these were like his early, middling days. But after this latest release, he got serious and he formed up a quality gang. Up until this time, Vasquez and his gang were relatively innocent criminals. But then in 1873, there was a holdup that they staged in the town of Tres Pinos, and it ended with a triple murder.
Cool.
And Tiburcio Vasquez became a household name in California. And then he followed this up with a visit to the town of Kingston, which is near Fresno, where he and his gang tied up everybody in town and they sacked the entire town in 5 minutes.
Wow.
This meant that now he had a $15,000 bounty on his head and his name was too hot, like heat, in Northern California, so he decided to move exclusively down south to LA County, and he set up camp at Lake Elizabeth, which is near Castaic Lake.
Yeah.
But eventually, he was found out and just barely eluded capture by the duo of the Monterey Sheriff and LA County Sheriff William Rowland, who was the youngest LA County Sheriff at age 25. They found them because his position was given away by an old cohort of his whose wife was cheating on him with Vasquez. So after this...
Friends don't have any.
Never have friends.
I agree.
After they got chased out, Vasquez fled into the San Gabriels with this woman and one remaining trusty partner. They were there for a while. The woman gave birth to Vasquez's child, but eventually Vasquez wanted to get back into the game, so he abandoned this woman and the baby in the mountains, and he left to put together a new gang and took up his new hiding place in Agua Dulce at the famous area now known as Vasquez Rocks, which is like, it's very close by. This area used to be home to the Tatavian Indians. Since then, it's become an iconic filming location. It's been used in Blazing Saddles, the Flintstones movie, the 1931 Dracula, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Army of Darkness, the Muppet movie, The Lone Ranger, Lassie, Twilight Zone, Zorro. It was in the music video for Black or White, and it's been used so frequently in Star Trek that it's referred to by losers as Kirk's Rock.
You just named all my favorite movies.
Lassie movie?
Yeah, my top 20 favorite movies you just listed right now. What's a Star Trek?
What's Muppets? So from these rocks, Vasquez descended through the valley. He spent some time in those rocks above Chatsworth, where
Santa Susana,
where the Mansons lived for a little bit.
Spawn Ranch.
They went back through the Santa Monica Mountains and they scoped out a ranch of George Carolombo, aka Greek George, who was a Syrian immigrant that drove camels in the army for General Beale, who was actually the man to first bring California gold back east and started the gold rush. So he brought this upon himself, really. So this ranch, it was in an open, empty area of land that is now known as West Hollywood, around what is now Kings Road between Santa Monica and Fountain.
I know Kings Road.
Yeah, like some other charming criminals we know. He made friends very easily and allies everywhere he went, so Greek George agreed to let Vasquez and his men hide out on his ranch. So from here, Vasquez scouted around for their next target, and they settled on a 5,000-acre ranch near the San Gabriel Mission in what is now Monterey Park.
Okay.
The location is just west of Garfield Avenue between Coralview Street and El Repetto Drive, which you'll find out why it's called that. The man who owned the ranch's name was Alexander Repetto.
Oh, interesting. Like the street.
Repetto was an Italian immigrant. He's credited with pretty much establishing that part of the city, and he was publicly known to be very rich. So Vasquez gathered his men and made the journey. They went north through the valley, east through what is now Lakeview Terrace and Sunland Tahunga. They camped out at the foot of a big rock they called Pietra Gordo, aka Fat Rock, which was either Eagle Rock or where the Devil Gates Dam is at Arroyo Seco.
Okay.
And then the next day, on April 14th, 1874, Vasquez and his men approached the ranch posing as sheep shearers and were let into Repetto's house. And immediately when they got inside, they pulled out their guns and Vasquez demanded his money. Repetto insisted he had no money, but eventually he pulled up $80 to give to them. But Vasquez knew he had more, so he took him outside, strung him up to a tree, and put a gun in each of his ears and told him that if he didn't give him more, he'd hang him. But Repetto insisted he had just deposited most of his money in the bank, So Vasquez demanded to look at his finance books, and
Give
they all put on their accounting visors.
me that abacus.
It turned out that it was true. All of his money he just put in the bank. So Vasquez made him write a check for $500 and sent Repetto's terrified nephew to the bank to cash it and bring the money back. This bank was the Temple and Workman Bank, which was on the Temple block, which is now City Hall. And here's the incredible connection I found. Temple and Workman Bank evolved into the Farmers and Merchants Bank, which was bought by the Security First National Bank, which evolved into Security Pacific Bank, which is the bank that Stanley Rifkin robbed at the beginning of the story. And you said that the baby bandits also hit that bank.
Yep, they also hit that bank.
Yeah. To give the Repetto's nephew a little extra boost of confidence, he told him that if he said a word to anybody at the bank, he would come back home to a dead uncle.
So I'll know. Just trust me, I'll know.
So the boy got to the bank, but he was visibly nervous and suspicious looking. So the bank called Sheriff Rowland, and he told them what was happening at his uncle's ranch. So the boy said, all right, just give me 30 minutes. He went ahead of them, threw the money at the robbers, but as they were counting it all out, they saw the dust coming up from like a mile away of the officers coming. So they grabbed all their stuff, and they made off like bandits.
Ooh. Is that where the phrase comes from?
What phrase? So supposedly on their way out, they stopped and buried a large amount of gold on the ranch, which led to a legend that there was buried treasure on Repetto's ranch, which eventually led to treasure seekers just trashing the place in the early 1900s trying to find that gold.
God.
As they were fleeing, they stopped to rob a passing group of men, including the superintendent of the Los Angeles Water Company. They took $300 in coin and gold, and they also took the superintendent's watch. And then they stopped again as they were getting away to rob a settler as the sheriff's posse was in sight. So then Vasquez and his gang, they fled into Arroyo Seco. They were just barely ahead of the sheriff's posse for over a day in a chase that led through the Big Tujunga Canyon. When they had to camp out at night, they were less than a mile apart from each other.
Wow.
And from here, Vasquez hid out for a night at Mission San Fernando, whose overseer was anti-gringo, and he sympathized with Vasquez before completing the escape and crossing back through the valley to Greek George's. So they got away. The news of a heist was huge, and the city was terrified at the prospect of Vasquez still being on the loose, and it became apparent to the citizens that they were not safe. The city was in chaos, and the police couldn't do anything to protect them, and people were sick of it. So everyone wanted his capture, and hundreds of people were sworn in as deputies to help find him.
Oh my God.
Meanwhile, Vasquez was hiding safely at the ranch. He got a girl pregnant who was either his niece or the daughter of one of his men, but whoever it was, their family was not happy about it, and they went to the sheriff, and they tipped him off. So Sheriff Rowland sent an undercover agent to the ranch who spotted Vasquez there, and then he formed a posse and advanced on May 13th, 1874. There was an empty lumber wagon that was passing by that they commandeered and hid in the back, and then it just got up, and the people at the ranch were like, it's just another lumber wagon. Then they all just piled out, and they stormed the house. Vasquez jumped out of an 18-inch square window. I don't know how he fit through that. He jumped right into the gun of an officer who shot him in the shoulder with a shotgun. Vasquez immediately admitted who he was and surrendered. He told his captors that they were good men, and he said, it was my fault. I shouldn't have tried to escape. He was taken...
Listen, we all made mistakes. You want a Trojan horse me, that's
Let
fine.
me see your gun. He was taken into LA County Jail where he was held for 9 days. During these 9 days, in true LA fashion, he became a major celebrity. Since cross-country communication was just starting to be established, Vasquez's exploits and trial became one of the first big nationally sensational stories. His name was even known in Canada.
Wow.
Yeah, wherever that is. He got hundreds of visitors. Many of them were first-class ladies who brought him bouquets. One day he got 673 visitors, and everybody loved him. The superintendent of the water company came to see him that he had just robbed.
He robbed him.
Vasquez apologized for what he did and returned his watch.
Classy.
Even Repetto came to visit, and he forgave him.
Wow.
Yeah, he even...
This guy's charming.
I know.
He reminds me a little bit of Ruoff Valentino.
He even got a professional portrait taken of him when he was in jail. He sold autograph pictures of himself out of his cell window to raise money to pay for his defense. The Merced Theater even put on a show called The Life and Times of Tiburcio Vasquez, which they put together in these 9 days that he was in jail. The lead actor was coached by Vasquez himself, who would visit him in prison, like Hannibal Lecter, on how to portray him, and even gave him his own clothes to make the show more authentic. Vasquez wanted to play the part himself, but the sheriff wouldn't let him. And then everyone went, "Oh,
come on, just
sheriff."
let him.
He murdered 3 people. All the newspapers interviewed him, which is when he started telling everybody that what he was doing was actually to try to start a revolution to retake California and give it back to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
He said he was punishing whites for discriminating against people of Mexican and Spanish descent.
Anti-gringo.
And he planned to raise $50,000 to form an army to sack Los Angeles and then move their way south to take over San Diego.
Boo. Boring. Let him.
He swore that he was on a crusade of equality and justice.
Mm-hmm.
He confessed to all his robberies, but he denied that he had anything to do with the triple murder in Tres Pinos.
Mm-hmm.
So after his 9 days in LA, he was transferred up to San Jose, where he was sentenced to hang for the murders on March 19th, 1875. This was the last public hanging in California.
Really?
Yeah, the only word he spoke from the gallows before he was hanged was pronto. So he's now buried at the Santa Clara Mission. Nowadays, Vasquez's legacy is kind of confusing because he was a convicted murderer and known robber and philanderer, but there's a Tiburcio Vasquez elementary school in Salinas, several healthcare centers and parks that are named after him.
Mm-hmm.
He's seen as something of a Robin Hood character for the
Yeah.
Mexican people, even though he kept all the money for himself. And he's looked back on fondly as a Mexican hero. It's the question of what version of his story do we believe? The one that glorifies him? The one that vilifies him? Do we remember him sticking a gun into an Italian immigrant's ear? Or do we remember him giving back the superintendent of the water company his watch? I think he wasn't a Robin Hood figure, but he was a Mexican who was doing something, even though it was bad, at a time when Mexican people were being treated like dirt and they were being pushed to a breaking point on what used to be their own land. One of them just decided to push back.
We got our Batman.
Regardless, when Vasquez left LA, he took an era with him and the city started to settle down. Apparently, since 1868, a bunch of Midwesterners were moving into LA, and they brought with them their zero tolerance for characters like Vasquez, and were actively trying to make LA more family-friendly and attractive to God-fearing folk, which sounds kind of similar.
Yeah, it does.
One of the things I read in doing the research that put it best, when they said at this time the pistol shot was drowned out by the school bell.
Oh, I like that.
Which stayed true for about 100 years, and then things got awful again. So those are our stories.
That's fascinating. It's very Hollywood of a bandit to be getting like dust to be teaching coaching an actor on the stage performance.
I know.
People he mugged came back like, "Hey, how you doing?
Remember me? You bugged me.
No, keep the watch. It's fine.
Can I be in your gang?
I bought a potato gun. That's cool, right?" Yeah, that's great.
Not for another 80 years, kid.